He thought he'd never see his abandoned wife again after choosing his young secretary. But when she stepped out of a limo at his wedding with 3 identical toddlers calling Daddy, the entire church fell silent. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Sarah Bennett stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Upper East Side penthouse, gazing at the Manhattan skyline as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. Her hand rested instinctively on her 8-month pregnant belly, the stretched skin taut beneath her cashmere sweater. At 28, Sarah had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn, from promising environmental engineer to the supportive wife of one of New York's rising business stars. The gentle movement of the triplets inside her brought a smile to her face. 3 little lives growing stronger each day. She'd abandoned her doctoral research at Columbia to support Michael's vision of transforming his family's modest company into what was now Thornton Enterprises, valued at several $100 million. A sacrifice she had made willingly, out of love. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the apartment, followed by the familiar rhythm of Michael's footsteps on the marble floor. Sarah turned, her smile widening, only to falter as she caught sight of his face. Michael Thornton, once unable to enter a room without immediately seeking her out, now stood with his gaze fixed somewhere above her shoulder, his expression unnervingly cold. "We need to talk," he said, voice devoid of the warmth that had once made her heart race. Sarah's smile returned, albeit tentatively. Perhaps they would finally discuss names for the babies. The news of triplets had come as a shock 4 months ago when the doctor detected 3 distinct heartbeats. Michael had been increasingly distant since then, but she had attributed it to the stress of his expanding business. "I've been thinking about names," she said, moving toward him with the deliberate grace her new center of gravity demanded. "What do you think about Alexander for the first boy? It's strong, classic." "I've hired lawyers," Michael interrupted, finally meeting her eyes with a glacial stare. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, so absurd that Sarah's first instinct was to laugh. But the unwavering coldness in his eyes strangled the sound before it could escape her throat. "Divorce?" she whispered, her hand protectively covering her belly. "Michael, you're not making sense. We're about to have 3 children. Our family." "Family?" Michael's laugh was sharp, cruel, nothing like the warm chuckle that had once been her favorite sound. "Do you really believe I want to be trapped with a woman who'll spend the rest of her life changing diapers and wiping noses? Look at yourself, Sarah." His eyes raked over her body with disdain, as if her pregnancy were some kind of disease rather than the miracle they had planned together. "Where's the woman I fell in love with? The brilliant researcher? The ambitious intellectual? You've become ordinary, predictable, boring." Sarah took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "Michael, please. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. The babies will be here soon and things will—" Michael recoiled from her touch as if she were contagious, his face contorted with disgust. "Don't. Just don't." Realization dawned slowly, painfully. "It's Jennifer, isn't it? Your assistant." The late-night texts, the weekend emergency meetings, the subtle change in his cologne, all the signs she had willfully ignored now screamed their truth. Michael's silence was confirmation enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was oddly matter-of-fact. "Jennifer is 22. She has ambition, drive, and she doesn't come with baggage." "Baggage?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Is that what our children are to you?" Michael walked to their bedroom, pulling a designer suitcase from the closet and beginning to remove his clothes from the mahogany drawers. "Jennifer gives me what you can't anymore: freedom, excitement, a future without anchors." Sarah followed him, disbelief giving way to desperation. "How can you abandon your own children? They haven't even had a chance to know you." "They'll manage." Michael tossed tailored shirts into the suitcase with calculated indifference. people grow up without fathers every day. This isn't about them, is it? Sarah's voice grew stronger, anger beginning to penetrate the shock. This is about you being terrified of responsibility, of growing up. Michael slammed the drawer shut. This is about me refusing to settle for a life that suffocates me. I built Thornton Enterprises from nothing. I'm not about to be relegated to midnight feedings and suburban mediocrity because you decided motherhood was your new career path. I didn't decide this alone. We planned this pregnancy together. A mistake I'm correcting before it's too late. He zipped the suitcase with finality. For me, at least. Sarah sank to her knees, the weight of her belly pulling her down as much as the weight of his cruelty. Please, Michael, don't do this to us. Michael walked to the antique desk in the corner, pulled out the checkbook he kept for personal matters, and wrote with swift, decisive strokes. He tore the check free and tossed it onto the floor beside her. $200,000. Consider it my final contribution. You have 48 hours to vacate the apartment. My lawyers will contact you. He pulled another document from his briefcase. I've signed a paternity release. These children are your problem now. Sarah stared at the check on the polished hardwood floor, unable to comprehend how the man who had held her hand during their first ultrasound could now be treating their children like an inconvenient business transaction. You can't just sign away your children, she whispered. Actually, I can, and I have. Michael checked his watch. Jennifer is waiting. I've reserved the suite at the Four Seasons until you're gone. 2 weeks later, Sarah unlocked the door to a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, the ceiling stained with water damage, the windows rattling with each passing subway train. The $200,000, combined with her savings from before the marriage, would keep her afloat for a few months at best. She had spent the past 2 weeks in a blur of apartment viewings, each place more depressing than the last, but landlords were reluctant to rent to a heavily pregnant woman with no current employment. This dingy apartment, with its suspicious stains and temperamental plumbing, was the best she could find on short notice. Sarah had tried finding work, attempting to hide her pregnancy during interviews with strategically placed portfolios and loose blouses, but her advanced state made the deception impossible, and the rejections had been swift and uniform. We're not in a position to hire someone who'll need immediate maternity leave. Her Columbia colleagues had been sympathetic but unhelpful. The academic positions she'd once been groomed for had been filled years ago when she left to support Michael's ambitions. Her research was now outdated, her connections cold. On a frigid February night, the contractions began. Sarah called a taxi, wincing through the pain as she gave the driver directions to Bronx Public Hospital. The driver eyed her nervously in the rearview mirror, clearly worried she might deliver in his back seat. "First baby?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "First 3, Sarah managed through gritted teeth, causing the driver to press harder on the accelerator. For 16 grueling hours, Sarah fought through contractions, her hand gripping the hospital bed rail where a partner's hand should have been. Nurses came and went in shifts, offering clinical comfort, but the space beside her remained empty. Alexander came first, a lusty cry announcing his arrival at 2:17 in the morning. Andrew followed 7 minutes later, quieter but equally perfect. And finally, at 2:38, Abigail emerged, the smallest of the three but with a fierce grip when she wrapped her tiny hand around Sarah's finger. "Would you like me to notify the father?" the night nurse asked, clipboard in hand, unaware of the pain her question inflicted. Sarah looked at her 3 miraculous children, now cleaned and swaddled in the nursery beyond the glass window. "There is no father," she said, the words burning her throat. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in the lone armchair of her Bronx apartment, cradling Abigail while the boys finally slept in the second-hand crib she'd managed to fit into the bedroom. The ancient television flickered in the corner, the volume low enough not to disturb the precious silence. A segment about a charity gala filled the screen, and Sarah's breath caught as the camera panned to show Michael and Jennifer, his arm possessively around her waist. The caption beneath them read, Thornton Enterprises CEO announces engagement to former model. Jennifer glowed in a designer gown, her flat stomach and carefree smile a stark contrast to Sarah's exhaustion and the milk stains on her worn t-shirt. Michael looked exactly as he had the day he left, immaculate, confident, unburdened. That night, as rain lashed against the poorly sealed windows and one of the twins began to cry again, Sarah made a decision. With the babies finally asleep, she retrieved her unfinished master's thesis on renewable energy technology from the bottom of a moving box. In the margins of the first page, with a steady hand that belied her exhaustion, she wrote, "One day, Michael Thornton will kneel before what he rejected." That night, alone in her luxury bedroom for the last time, Sarah couldn't have imagined that 13 years later it would be her looking at Michael Thornton with pity while he begged for a second chance. The words Sarah had written in the margins of her thesis glowed with promise in the dim light of her cramped apartment. One day, Michael Thornton would indeed kneel before what he had rejected. But as the first weak rays of morning sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds, reality crashed back with the simultaneous cries of 3 hungry newborns. Sarah dragged herself from the threadbare couch where she'd fallen asleep, her body still aching from the cesarean delivery 3 weeks earlier. The small suitcase containing her belongings from her previous life sat unopened in the corner. Designer clothes that no longer fit her postpartum body, framed diplomas that now seemed to belong to another woman, photos of a smiling couple she barely recognized. The apartment building groaned around her, pipes clanking as neighbors began their morning routines. A water stain on the ceiling had grown overnight, the brownish mark now resembling a distorted map of Manhattan, the island that had once been her home, now visible only through smoggy windows across the river. "Coming, my loves," Sarah whispered, wincing as she bent to lift Alexander from the second-hand crib the 3 babies shared. His tiny face was red with effort, his cries triggering his siblings to wail with increasing urgency. 2 hours later, all 3 babies were fed, changed, and momentarily content. Sarah placed them carefully on a blanket spread across the living room floor, her academic journals serving as makeshift barriers to prevent them from rolling away. She surveyed her new kingdom, 400 square feet of peeling linoleum, exposed pipes, and dreams deferred. The check Michael had tossed at her, $200,000 meant to erase his conscience, was already diminishing rapidly. The security deposit and first 3 months' rent on this apartment. Medical expenses not covered by the emergency Medicaid she'd qualified for. Essential baby supplies multiplied by 3. At this rate, she had perhaps 4 months before financial catastrophe. 3 days later, Sarah bundled the triplets into the second-hand stroller she'd found on Craigslist, an unwieldy contraption that barely fit through her apartment door. With meticulous planning and remarkable persistence, she maneuvered onto a bus, then the subway, arriving at the employment agency in Midtown, where she'd scheduled her first interview. "I see you have an impressive academic background," the recruiter said, eyes periodically darting to the massive stroller where, miraculously, all 3 babies slept. "Environmental engineering at Columbia, research publications, but there's a 4-year gap in your resume." "I was supporting my husband's business," Sarah explained, subtly adjusting her blazer to conceal a milk stain. "I handled environmental compliance and sustainable development initiatives for Thornton Enterprises." The recruiter's eyebrows raised slightly. "Thornton? As in Michael Thornton?" "Yes." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "We're no longer together." "I see." The woman's eyes drifted pointedly to the triplets, then back to her computer screen. "Most of our corporate clients are looking for candidates who can commit to intense work schedules. Given your situation..." "I'm extremely organized and efficient," Sarah interjected, "and I'm willing to start at an entry-level position." The woman smiled with practiced sympathy. "We don't typically place candidates who are newly postpartum. Perhaps try again in a year or so, when your situation is more stable." This scene repeated itself across Manhattan and Brooklyn over the following weeks. Receptionists stared openly at the triplets. Hiring managers became suddenly apologetic when they saw her enter with the cumbersome stroller. "We're looking for someone who can start immediately without complications." By the time Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail were 2 months old, Sarah's bank account had dwindled to a dangerous level. She sat at her kitchen table, a discarded card table salvaged from the curb, calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to cooperate with her need to feed and house 4 people. The apartment grew increasingly claustrophobic as winter tightened its grip on the city. Heating was inconsistent at best, forcing Sarah to dress the babies in multiple layers and huddle with them under every blanket she owned during the coldest nights. A pipe burst in the apartment above, sending dirty water cascading down her bathroom wall, the landlord promising repairs that never materialized. On a particularly bleak Tuesday, as sleet rattled against the windows and the triplets battled simultaneous colds, Sarah reached a breaking point. She had $17 in her wallet and a refrigerator containing half a carton of milk, some nearly expired eggs, and a withered apple. Her once robust savings had evaporated into the abyss of medical bills, baby supplies, and rent. "We'll be okay," she whispered to Abigail, the smallest of the 3, who whimpered against her shoulder. "Mommy just needs to figure things out." That night, as the babies finally slept, Sarah opened her laptop, one of the few valuable possessions she'd kept from her previous life. She began systematically applying for any job that might accommodate a single mother of triplets: remote data entry, night shift customer service, weekend retail positions. By dawn, she had submitted 67 applications. The first response came 3 days later, a rejection, then another, and another. Each politely explained that her qualifications were impressive but not the right fit. What remained unwritten was the obvious. No one wanted to hire a desperate woman with 3 newborns and no childcare support. On a frigid morning in early February, exactly 1 month before the triplets' birth, Sarah awoke to a strange sensation in her abdomen. Having grown accustomed to the various discomforts of late pregnancy, she initially dismissed it. By noon, however, the irregular tightening had organized itself into unmistakable contractions. "Not yet," she pleaded with her body, with the babies, with whatever cosmic force might be listening. "Just a few more weeks." The hospital bag she'd packed sat by the door, a lonely sentinel prepared for this moment that shouldn't have arrived for another month. When the contractions reached 5 minutes apart, Sarah called a taxi, her voice surprisingly steady as she gave the Bronx Public Hospital address. The driver eyed her warily in the rearview mirror, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "Lady, you're not gonna have that baby in my cab, are you?" he asked, accelerating through a yellow light. "Babies," Sarah corrected, gritting her teeth through another contraction, "and I'll do my best not to." The hospital intake process was a blur of forms, questions, and pitying glances. "Father's name?" the clerk asked, pen poised above the paperwork. "There isn't one," Sarah replied, meeting the woman's eyes with quiet dignity. The labor and delivery floor was understaffed and overworked. Sarah was assigned to a room she shared with another laboring woman, separated only by a thin curtain. Her birth plan, once carefully crafted with Michael's input, had been reduced to a single goal: healthy babies. For 16 excruciating hours, Sarah labored alone. Nurses came and went, offering clinical encouragement and routine checks, but no one held her hand when the pain peaked. No one whispered that she was doing beautifully. No one wiped the sweat from her brow with loving hands. "You're fully dilated," the doctor announced during the 17th hour. "Time to meet these babies." Alexander arrived first at 2:17 in the morning, his indignant cry filling the delivery room. 7 minutes later, Andrew joined the world with less fanfare but equal perfection. Abigail, always destined to make her own entrance, arrived at 2:38 after a brief moment of concern that dissolved into relief when her tiny lungs finally filled with air. "Would you like to notify the father?" the night nurse asked, her question innocent but piercing. Sarah looked through the nursery window at her 3 miraculous children, now cleaned, weighed, and swaddled in hospital blankets. "There is no father," she said, the words both a wound and a declaration of independence. 3 weeks later, Sarah had settled into a military precision routine dictated by the needs of 3 newborns. Feed, change, soothe, repeat, an endless cycle interrupted only by her own basic necessities. Sleep came in 30-minute increments, often while sitting upright with a baby on her chest. The apartment, never spacious to begin with, had transformed into a chaotic landscape of baby paraphernalia. Diapers piled on every surface, bottles lined the small kitchen counter, waiting to be washed. Laundry, endless loads of tiny clothes constantly soiled, hung from makeshift lines strung across the living room. One night, after finally coaxing all 3 babies to sleep simultaneously, a rare victory, Sarah collapsed into the second-hand armchair donated by a sympathetic neighbor. She flicked on the ancient television, keeping the volume low, seeking some connection to the outside world she'd barely seen in weeks. The local news flickered across the screen, images of a charity gala capturing her attention. And then, like a cruel joke, there he was, Michael Thornton, immaculate in a tuxedo, his arm wrapped possessively around Jennifer's slim waist. The caption beneath them read, "Thornton Enterprises CEO announces engagement to former model." Jennifer glowed in a designer gown that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly expenses, her carefree smile and flat stomach a stark contrast to Sarah's exhaustion. Michael looked exactly as he had the day he left, confident, successful, unburdened by the weight of parenthood or conscience. The camera lingered on them just long enough for Sarah to hear Michael's laugh, that rich sound once reserved for private moments between them, as he responded to some off-camera question. "Jennifer and I are looking forward to building a future together," he said smoothly. "The right partner makes all the difference in achieving your dreams." Sarah stared at the screen, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as a cold clarity washed over her. While she struggled to keep 3 infants alive in a crumbling apartment, Michael had simply replaced her with a newer model and continued his charmed existence. As if sensing her distress, Abigail began to cry from the bedroom, her wails soon joined by her brother's in perfect harmony. The rain intensified outside, water seeping through the poorly sealed window frame and forming a puddle on the sill. Sarah moved automatically to comfort her children, lifting Abigail first as the smallest and most vulnerable. As she rocked her daughter, a strange calm settled over her. When the triplets finally quieted again, Sarah gently placed Abigail in the crib and retrieved a box she hadn't opened since moving in. From within, she pulled out her unfinished master's thesis on renewable energy technology. The research had been groundbreaking when she'd set it aside to support Michael's ambitions. Now it represented something more, a lifeline back to herself, to the brilliant mind she'd subordinated to his dreams. In the margins of the first page, with steady hands that belied her exhaustion, Sarah wrote, "One day, Michael Thornton will kneel before what he rejected." Adrift in that night of rain and revelation, cradling dreams as fragile as her sleeping infants, Sarah had no way of knowing that her thesis, scribbled upon between bottle feedings, would become the blueprint for a technology that governments around the world would one day compete to acquire. Sarah's words hung in the air of the tiny apartment like a promise to herself and her children. The margins of her thesis now contained more than academic notations. They held the blueprint of her future revenge. She carefully placed the document back in its folder, tucking it into the drawer of her makeshift desk, as a whimper from Abigail signaled the end of her momentary peace. The first months of motherhood crashed over Sarah like relentless waves, each day blending into the next in a haze of exhaustion. She developed a system born of necessity, a military precision schedule that allowed her to feed, change, and comfort 3 infants simultaneously. Sleep came in 30-minute increments, often while sitting upright with a baby nestled against her chest. "There we go, Alexander," she whispered, positioning him on one side of her body while Andrew nursed on the other. She had mastered the art of tandem feeding out of sheer necessity. Abigail, always the most patient of the three, watched from her bouncer with dark, observant eyes that seemed to understand far more than a baby should. Sarah's small apartment had transformed into an ecosystem designed for survival. Diapers were stacked on every available surface. Bottles lined the kitchen counter in various stages of cleaning. Laundry hung from makeshift lines strung across the living room, tiny onesies and burp cloths in constant rotation. The relentless rhythm of motherhood left little time for self-pity, but in rare moments of stillness, usually in the pre-dawn hours when the triplets finally slept simultaneously, Sarah would feel the full weight of her situation crash down upon her. The contrast between her current life and the luxury she had known with Michael was stark enough to take her breath away. One particularly difficult night, when all three babies were inconsolable with colic, Sarah found herself on the bathroom floor, back against the cracked tile wall, tears streaming down her face as muffled complaints from the upstairs neighbor thumped against the ceiling. "I can't do this," she whispered to no one, her voice barely audible over the chorus of cries from the bedroom. "I can't." The words hung in the air for a moment before being drowned out by Alexander's particularly forceful wail. Sarah wiped her eyes, pushed herself up from the floor, and returned to the bedroom where her children needed her. There was no alternative, no backup plan, no one coming to rescue them. They had only her, and she had only herself. By the time the triplets reached 4 months, Sarah had established a precarious routine. She had secured a part-time job as a virtual assistant, work she could complete during the baby's nap times and after they went to sleep. The pay was meager, barely covering the utilities, but it provided a thin lifeline while she developed a longer-term plan. Mrs. Martinez, an elderly widow who lived down the hall, had taken a shine to the triplets and often offered to watch them for short periods, refusing payment but accepting home-cooked meals that Sarah prepared with strategic efficiency. "You feed my soul, I watch your babies," Mrs. Martinez would say, waving away Sarah's profuse thanks. "Besides, these little ones remind me of my grandchildren in Puerto Rico." These brief respites allowed Sarah to shower uninterrupted or, more importantly, to work on adapting her academic research into something marketable. Her thesis on efficient energy storage systems for renewable sources had been cutting edge 3 years ago. Now she needed to update her knowledge and find a practical application that could generate income. "Alexander, please let Mommy work for just 10 more minutes," Sarah pleaded one evening, bouncing the fussy baby on her hip while trying to type one-handed. Her laptop, a high-end model from her previous life, seemed to mock her with its sleek design that belonged in a corner office, not balanced precariously on a folding table beside baby bottles. Andrew and Abigail were already asleep in the single crib the three shared, their tiny bodies curled toward each other like parentheses. Alexander, always the most strong-willed of the three, fought sleep with impressive determination for a 4-month-old. "You're going to be the difficult one, aren't you?" Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Just like your father, stubborn to a fault." The thought of Michael sent a familiar ache through her chest. She hadn't allowed herself to check his social media accounts or search for news about him, knowing that seeing images of his new life with Jennifer would only reopen wounds that were slowly beginning to scab over. Instead, she channeled her anger and hurt into her research. Night after night, while the babies slept, Sarah immersed herself in scientific journals, technical forums, and industry reports. Her focus narrowed to a specific problem. Current battery storage systems for solar energy were inefficient and used environmentally problematic materials. If she could develop a more efficient, greener alternative, there might be commercial potential. The solution began to take shape in her mind during one particularly colicky night when all three babies seemed determined to stay awake until dawn. As Sarah paced the small apartment, a baby in each arm and the third in a sling across her chest, the pieces of her research suddenly connected in a new configuration. "That's it," she whispered, the excitement momentarily overriding her exhaustion. "A carbon-silicon composite matrix with nanoscale conductivity channels," Alexander gurgled in response, his tiny hand grasping at her collar. "You think so too, Sarah smiled down at him. "Maybe you'll be an engineer like your mom after all." The following morning, operating on perhaps 2 hours of fragmented sleep, Sarah called her former academic advisor at Columbia, Professor Morris. She hadn't spoken to him since leaving the program to support Michael's business ventures, and her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed his number. "Sarah Bennett," the professor's voice boomed through the speaker. "I was just thinking about you last week when reviewing some work on thermodynamic efficiency in battery systems. Your research was ahead of its time." The simple acknowledgement of her academic worth brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you, Professor. Actually, I've been expanding on that research, and I think I've developed a viable approach to the conductivity problem we were struggling with." As she outlined her new theoretical model, the excitement in Professor Morris's responses confirmed what she had hoped. Her idea had significant potential. When she finished explaining, there was a moment of silence on the line. "Sarah, this could be groundbreaking," he finally said. "But I have to ask, why are you calling me instead of developing this through Thornton Enterprises? Surely your husband's company would jump at this technology." The question pierced through her carefully constructed composure. "Michael and I are no longer together," she said, striving for a neutral tone. "I'm raising our children alone and trying to restart my career." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, their loss is the scientific community's gain. Send me your preliminary designs, and I'll provide feedback. And Sarah, it's good to have you back in the field." The validation from her former mentor gave Sarah a crucial boost of confidence. Over the next several weeks, she refined her concept, working during nap times, after bedtime, and in the early morning hours before the triplets woke. Her apartment gradually transformed into a strange hybrid of nursery and research lab, with scientific journals stacked beside parenting books and formula canisters sharing space with technical drawings. When the triplets reached 6 months, Sarah encountered a new challenge. The part-time virtual assistant position wasn't generating enough income, and her savings were nearly depleted. She needed to find a way to monetize her research quickly or face the possibility of losing their apartment. The opportunity came in the form of a small technology startup competition with a $5,000 prize for the most promising green energy innovation. The entry fee was $250, a significant portion of her remaining funds, but the potential return made it worth the risk. Sarah spent 2 weeks preparing her submission, meticulously detailing her battery design and its potential applications. Mrs. Martinez agreed to watch the triplets for the 4 hours needed to present at the competition, accepting only a homemade flan as payment. On the morning of the competition, Sarah dressed in the one professional outfit that still fit her post-pregnancy body, a navy blue skirt suit that had once been tailored to her pre-triplets figure. She applied makeup for the first time in months, the routine feeling foreign after so long focused solely on survival. "You look like a boss lady," Mrs. Martinez nodded approvingly when Sarah dropped off the babies. "Go show them what a mama can do." The competition venue was a small convention center in downtown Brooklyn. Sarah arrived clutching her presentation materials and a breast pump concealed in a tote bag, a necessary accessory for a mother of 3 6-month-olds. The other competitors were predominantly men in their 20s and 30s, many representing university research teams or existing startups with seed funding. As Sarah set up her modest display booth, just a poster board and a small working prototype, she overheard snippets of conversation from nearby competitors. "Who's the soccer mom?" one man whispered to his colleague, glancing in her direction. "Probably someone's assistant," the other replied with a dismissive shrug. Sarah felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks, the same burning shame she had experienced when Michael had looked at her pregnant body with disgust. But this time, instead of crumbling, she channeled the emotion into determination. When her turn came to present, Sarah stepped to the front of the room with 3 photographs tucked into her portfolio, one of each of her babies. These weren't props for emotional appeal. They were her reminders of why failure wasn't an option. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "And I'm here to introduce a battery storage technology that will increase efficiency of solar energy systems by 37% while reducing manufacturing costs by 22%. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah presented her research with the clarity and precision that had once made her a rising star at Columbia. The technical questions that followed were challenging but fair, and she addressed each one with confidence born of countless late nights researching while her babies slept. When the winners were announced 3 hours later, Sarah stood in stunned silence as her name was called for the second-place prize of $3,000. It wasn't the full amount, but it was enough to cover 2 months of rent and utilities. Precious time to develop her concept further. As she accepted the check, one of the judges, a venture capitalist named Elena Rodriguez, handed Sarah her business card. "This technology has commercial potential," she said quietly. "Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps." That night, as Sarah fed the triplets their evening bottles, the small victory felt monumental. The $3,000 check sat on her makeshift desk beside Elena's business card, tangible proof that her mind was still valuable, that her ideas could still matter in the world beyond motherhood. "We did it, little ones," she whispered to her drowsy babies. "First step of many." When all 3 were finally asleep, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of indulgence. She opened her laptop and, against her better judgment, typed Michael's name into the search bar. The results loaded quickly. Photos from a charity gala, Michael and Jennifer posing on a red carpet, her diamond engagement ring catching the camera flashes. Sarah closed the browser before reading the accompanying article. Instead, she opened her research notes and continued working on refinements to her battery design, her determination hardened by the glimpse of the life Michael now lived, a life built on the ruins of the future he had promised her. Asleep at her desk hours later, drafting technical specifications between bottle feedings, Sarah couldn't know that those scribbled diagrams would evolve into the revolutionary technology that, in just a decade, would be fought over by governments worldwide. The triumph of the competition victory glowed within Sarah long after the triplets had fallen asleep. The business card from Elena Rodriguez seemed to pulse with possibility on her nightstand, a beacon guiding her toward a future she was only beginning to envision. 1 year had passed since the birth of her children, and while the journey had been grueling, Sarah was finally planting seeds that might one day bloom into salvation. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the apartment she had managed to purchase with her last savings and what remained of Michael's parting check. It was small and in desperate need of repairs, but it was hers, a foundation upon which to rebuild. "Good morning, my loves," Sarah cooed as Alexander's eyes fluttered open first, followed by Andrew's sleepy yawn and Abigail's stretching arms. The coordinated awakening of triplets was a symphony she had learned to conduct with practiced precision. Today marked a new chapter. After weeks of communication with Elena following the competition, Sarah had secured a small loan to develop her prototype further. The terms were challenging. Elena would own 30% of any resulting patents, but it provided enough runway to pursue her vision while keeping a roof over their heads. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed the number of a local diner that had advertised for waitstaff. The competition money had extended their security by 2 months, but it wasn't enough for long-term sustainability. She needed steady income while developing her technology. "Cuppa Joe Diner, Margie speaking," a gruff voice answered. "Hello, I'm calling about the waitress position," Sarah said, bouncing Abigail on her hip while Alexander and Andrew played with wooden blocks on the floor, a birthday gift from Mrs. Martinez. "Experience?" Margie asked bluntly. "I worked as a waitress through undergraduate," Sarah replied, omitting that her undergraduate studies had been at MIT before Columbia recruited her for their environmental engineering program. Can you start tomorrow? 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift, 6 days a week. Tips are decent if you're quick. Sarah glanced at her babies, calculating childcare logistics. Yes, I can start tomorrow. With Mrs. Martinez agreeing to arrive at 4:30 each morning in exchange for dinner preparations, Sarah established a new rhythm. She would wake at 3:30, prepare bottles for the day, leave for the diner by 4:45, work until 1, rush home to relieve Mrs. Martinez, spend afternoons with the triplets, and then work on her research after they went to bed until she collapsed from exhaustion around midnight. Order up! Table 7 needs refills and Table 3 is getting impatient, Margie barked 2 weeks into Sarah's employment. The diner was unexpectedly busy for a Tuesday, and Sarah's feet already ached in the second-hand sneakers she'd purchased from a thrift store. Coming right up, Sarah replied, expertly balancing 4 plates along her arm, a skill that had returned more quickly than she'd expected. As she delivered breakfast to a table of suited businessmen, she caught fragments of their conversation. Thornton Enterprises is pivoting toward traditional energy again. Their green initiative was just for show. Heard they're abandoning the solar division entirely. Sarah nearly dropped the coffee pot. It was the first she'd heard of Michael's business in months, and the news sent an unexpected jolt through her. His company was retreating from renewable energy, the very field she was betting her future on. "More coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, her professional smile never wavering as she filled their cups. They barely acknowledged her, continuing their conversation as if she were invisible. That's where the real money is. Traditional energy. This green movement is just a passing trend. Sarah bit her tongue, resisting the urge to educate these men on the scientific consensus regarding climate change and renewable energy market projections. Instead, she tucked their conversation away as valuable market intelligence, information she could use in refining her own business strategy. For 3 months, Sarah maintained her punishing schedule. During rare moments of respite, she would collapse on the floor beside the triplets, now crawling with determination and beginning to pull themselves up on furniture. Their first birthday approached, a milestone that seemed impossible when she had brought them home to the dilapidated Bronx apartment a year earlier. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm hoping to take an hour this afternoon to work on my prototype," Sarah said one morning as she prepared to leave for her shift. "The triplets should nap around noon." "Go, go," the older woman shooed her. "I make them birthday cake today. Practice for the big day." Sarah's laboratory was the building's shared laundry room during off hours. The superintendent, touched by her story and impressed by her determination, had given her permission to use the space when others weren't doing laundry, usually between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. With components purchased gradually over weeks, Sarah had assembled a working model of her battery system. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a carbon-silicon composite that stored solar energy more efficiently than existing technologies, with fewer toxic materials and a longer lifespan. "Let's see if you work as well in reality as you do in theory," Sarah muttered, connecting the final wires to her testing apparatus. The prototype hummed to life, LED indicators glowing steadily as the system began charging from the small solar panel she'd positioned near the laundry room's only window. Sarah meticulously recorded measurements, her heart racing as the numbers confirmed what she had hypothesized, a 34% improvement in efficiency over standard systems. "It works," she whispered, tears suddenly blurring her vision. "It actually works." That evening, after tucking the triplets in bed, Sarah called Elena Rodriguez. "I have a working prototype," she said without preamble when Elena answered. "The efficiency numbers exceed my projections." "Send me the data," Elena replied, her usual business-like tone tinged with excitement. "If it's as good as you say, we need to file provisional patents immediately." 2 weeks later, on the triplets' first birthday, Sarah sat across from Elena in a small law office in downtown Manhattan. The contrast between them was stark. Elena in a tailored Armani suit, Sarah in her best thrift store find, slightly too large but presentable enough. "The patent applications have been filed," The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet, confirmed. Now we need to discuss commercialization strategy. There are several options: licensing the technology, seeking venture capital to start manufacturing, or selling the patents outright. I don't want to sell, Sarah said immediately, thinking of the research she'd abandoned to support Michael's dreams. This is just the beginning. I have ideas for applications beyond simple storage. Elena studied her thoughtfully. Manufacturing requires significant capital, Sarah. We're talking millions. Then we start small. Target a specific application where efficiency matters more than scale. Sarah pulled out a folder containing meticulously prepared market research, analysis conducted during pre-dawn hours and rare moments of quiet while the triplets napped. Solar-powered charging stations for urban areas. We can manufacture on a limited scale, prove the concept works in real-world applications, and then expand. Janet and Elena exchanged impressed glances. You've thought this through, Elena acknowledged. But we'll need additional investment. I can contribute another $50,000, but we'll need more. Sarah took a deep breath. I'd like to mortgage my apartment. It's not worth much, but it should provide another $50,000. You'd risk your home? Janet asked, eyebrows raised. With 3 children to support? Sarah met her gaze steadily. Sometimes you have to risk everything to build something that matters. The words echoed in her mind, a direct contradiction to what Michael had told her the day he left. He had claimed she lacked ambition, that motherhood had made her boring and predictable. Every step she took now was a refutation of his cruel assessment. By the time the triplets reached 15 months, Bennett Renewable Energy existed as more than just an idea. With the combined investment from Elena and Sarah's mortgage, they had rented a small manufacturing space in Brooklyn and hired 2 part-time engineers to help refine the production process. Sarah continued working at the diner, using her tips to supplement their meager budget, while Elena handled business development. The first prototype charging station was installed outside a popular Brooklyn coffee shop whose owner had agreed to the experiment in exchange for free electricity. The simple kiosk, branded with the Bennett Renewable Energy logo Sarah had designed herself, allowed customers to charge phones and laptops using entirely solar power stored in their revolutionary battery system. It's been a hit, the coffee shop owner reported 2 weeks after installation. People actually choose my place over competitors because they can charge their devices while they work. When can I get another one? This small success led to orders from 3 more local businesses, creating enough revenue to justify Sarah reducing her diner shifts to 3 days a week. The additional time allowed her to focus on refining their manufacturing process and developing the next generation of their technology. One crisp autumn morning, as Sarah prepared the triplets for their day, a letter arrived that changed everything. The envelope bore the logo of a major technology conference in Manhattan. Dear Ms. Bennett, it read, we are pleased to inform you that Bennett Renewable Energy has been selected to exhibit at the Green Tech Innovation Showcase next month. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the invitation. The Green Tech Showcase was attended by major investors, technology scouts from multinational corporations, and media from around the world. It was an opportunity to catapult their small company into the spotlight. Preparations consumed the next 4 weeks. Sarah and her small team worked feverishly to create a compelling exhibition booth and perfect their presentation. The challenge of arranging childcare for the 3-day event was solved when Mrs. Martinez's daughter agreed to help, ensuring the triplets would be well cared for while Sarah pursued this crucial opportunity. The morning of the showcase, Sarah dressed in a newly purchased suit, her first non-thrifted professional outfit since before the triplets were born. It wasn't designer quality, but it was well-fitted and projected the image of a serious entrepreneur rather than a struggling single mother. "You look beautiful, Mommy," Abigail said solemnly as Sarah prepared to leave, the little girl's vocabulary remarkably advanced for her 15 months. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah replied, kneeling to hug each of her children. "Mommy's going to show people the special batteries we've been working on. Come back with ice cream." Alexander requested, always the pragmatist. The convention center buzzed with activity as Sarah and Elena set up their modest booth. Unlike many exhibitors with elaborate displays and teams of staff, Bennett Renewable Energy had a simple presentation focused entirely on their technology's performance data and real-world applications. "Don't be intimidated," Elena advised, noting Sarah's wide eyes as she observed the competition. "Most of these companies have more style than substance. We have actual results." By midday, a small crowd had gathered around their booth, attracted by the simple sign, 34% more efficient, 22% lower cost, 100% cleaner. Sarah presented their technology with growing confidence, answering technical questions with the expertise that had once made her a rising star in academic circles. Among the observers was a tall Japanese man who listened intently without asking questions. As the crowd dispersed, he approached Sarah directly. "Ms. Bennett, I am Hiroshi Tanaka, Chief Technology Officer for Suntech Industries. Your battery design is intriguing. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration." Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Elena, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We'd be delighted to discuss possibilities, Mr. Tanaka," Sarah replied, her heart racing as she handed him her newly printed business card. As Tanaka walked away, Elena leaned close. "Suntech is one of the largest solar manufacturers in Asia. If they're interested, this could be huge." The following day, Sarah and Elena met Tanaka for breakfast at his hotel. The meeting, scheduled for 30 minutes, stretched to 2 hours as they discussed technical specifications and potential applications. By the time coffee cups were cleared, Tanaka had made an offer that left Sarah speechless. "Suntech would like to license your technology for integration into our next-generation solar panels. We propose an initial payment of $2 million plus royalties on all units sold." $2 million. The figure represented freedom, security for her children, vindication of her choices. "We'll need to review the terms carefully," Elena responded smoothly, seeing that Sarah was momentarily overwhelmed. That night, alone in her apartment with the triplets sleeping peacefully, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, considering the offer. $2 million would change everything. She could buy a proper home, hire help, focus entirely on research and development. It was the logical choice. Yet something held her back. Accepting the offer meant selling her first major innovation, an innovation that could be the foundation for something much larger. As Sarah drifted into an exhausted sleep, Michael's dismissive words echoed in her mind. "You've become ordinary, predictable, boring." By rejecting those $2 million, many called Sarah crazy, but no one could predict that this decision would be the first step in building an empire that, in 10 years, would be worth billions, while Michael's Thornton Enterprises would begin its slow downward spiral. The night after rejecting Suntech's $2 million offer, Sarah slept fitfully, her dreams filled with Michael's mocking laughter and the constant worry of having potentially sacrificed her children's security for her pride. By morning, however, clarity had replaced doubt. She wasn't rejecting wealth. She was investing in something far more valuable, her vision. 3 years had passed since the birth of the triplets, and Bennett Renewable Energy had evolved from a desperate hope into a promising reality. With Elena's continued support and the momentum gained from the Green Tech Showcase, Sarah had secured enough investment to move operations to a modest office space in Brooklyn, hiring 2 brilliant engineers who believed in her technology enough to accept below-market salaries in exchange for equity. "Ms. Bennett, the latest efficiency tests are complete," called Thomas Chen from his workstation. The young MIT graduate had turned down offers from Silicon Valley giants to join her fledgling company, convinced that her battery technology would revolutionize renewable energy storage. Sarah looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing supply chain logistics while simultaneously editing a grant application. "And?" Thomas grinned, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. 37% improvement over standard systems. We've exceeded our projections." Layla Washington, Their materials scientist poached from a government research lab joined them with her own tablet. The degradation rate is lower than expected, too. These batteries will maintain peak performance significantly longer than competitors. Sarah allowed herself a moment to savor the validation. Her instinct to refuse Suntech's offer had been correct. They were building something far more valuable than a single patent. "Perfect timing," she said, turning her laptop to show them an email. "The Department of Energy's Renewable Energy Division wants a presentation next week. If we can secure this grant, we'll have enough funding to scale production without surrendering more equity." That evening, Sarah arrived home earlier than usual, eager to spend time with the triplets before their bedtime. The small apartment they now occupied in a slightly better neighborhood was filled with the controlled chaos of 3-year-olds, building blocks scattered across the floor, picture books stacked haphazardly, and the distant sound of Mrs. Martinez singing a Spanish lullaby in the bathroom as she supervised bath time. "Mommy's home!" Sarah called, setting down her briefcase filled with technical specifications and business projections. 3 wet heads appeared around the bathroom doorway, followed by the thundering of small feet as Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail raced toward her, wrapped in towels and trailing water droplets. "Careful, Miss Angelitos!" Mrs. Martinez called after them, smiling indulgently. "You'll slip!" Sarah knelt to receive their collective embrace, inhaling the clean scent of baby shampoo and feeling the day's tension melt away. These moments, these perfect, chaotic moments, reminded her why every sacrifice was worthwhile. "I made a tower taller than Andrew," Alexander announced proudly, always the competitive one. "I played Mary Had a Little Lamb on Mrs. Martinez's piano," Andrew countered, his musical inclinations already evident. Abigail, ever the diplomat, simply wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck and whispered, "I missed you, Mommy." After stories, songs, and tucking 3 increasingly independent children into their beds, Sarah joined Mrs. Martinez in the small kitchen. "They grow too fast," the older woman observed, handing Sarah a cup of tea. Alexander already doing math problems from first-grade books. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She had noticed Alexander's facility with numbers, the way he organized his toys by size and color, his fascination with patterns. His teacher mentioned he might need advanced placement. And Andrew, such sensitive ears. "He tell me when my singing is off-key." Mrs. Martinez chuckled. "That boy has music in his soul." "And Abigail?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "That one?" Mrs. Martinez's eyes twinkled. "She is the boss. She organized the other children at playground, tell everyone where to go, what to do. Natural leader, that girl." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest, temporarily displacing the constant fatigue of building a business while raising triplets. Her children were thriving despite everything. Despite starting life in a dingy Bronx apartment, despite lacking the financial advantages Michael could have provided, despite having only one parent. After Mrs. Martinez left, Sarah spread her work across the kitchen table, determined to perfect the Department of Energy presentation. Hours passed as she refined data points and strengthened arguments, her eyes growing heavy as midnight approached. A noise from the children's room prompted her to check on them. In the soft glow of their nightlight, she observed 3 sleeping forms. Alexander sprawled diagonally across his bed, Andrew curled tightly around a stuffed bear, and Abigail sleeping with one arm extended toward her brothers, as if keeping watch even in slumber. The sight grounded Sarah, reminding her that success wasn't measured solely in patents and profit margins. She returned to her work with renewed purpose, finally collapsing into bed around 2 in the morning. The Department of Energy presentation the following week exceeded all expectations. The grant committee, comprised of scientists and government officials, peppered Sarah with technical questions that she answered with confidence born of countless late nights perfecting her technology. "Ms. Bennett," the committee chair said as the presentation concluded, "your innovation addresses a critical gap in renewable energy implementation. The efficiency improvements you've demonstrated could accelerate our transition away from fossil fuels significantly." 2 weeks later, Bennett Renewable Energy received notification of a $500,000 grant, enough to expand manufacturing capacity and hire additional staff. The validation from the Department of Energy opened doors that had previously remained firmly closed, leading to contracts with research institutions and small municipalities interested in piloting the technology. As the company grew, so did the Triplets. Their 5th birthday approached, a milestone that felt miraculous given the circumstances of their early days. Sarah had planned a small celebration at a local park, inviting children from their preschool class and the handful of friends she'd managed to make despite her punishing schedule. The evening before the party, Sarah sat at her desk in the now expanded Brooklyn office, reviewing the latest industry reports. A technology magazine lay open beside her laptop, and a familiar name caught her eye: Thornton Enterprises. Sarah's hand froze above her keyboard. She had maintained strict discipline about not searching for information about Michael, but here was an article directly related to her industry. Professional interest, she told herself as she began to read. "Thornton Enterprises retreats from green energy initiatives," the headline declared. The article detailed how Michael's company had scaled back its renewable energy division, citing market uncertainties and return to core competencies as justification for abandoning projects they had heavily promoted just 2 years earlier. A photograph accompanied the article: Michael and Jennifer at some gala, his arm possessively around her waist. The caption noted they had been married for 3 years now. Jennifer's designer gown probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe, and Michael's smile appeared as confident as ever, though subtle signs of strain showed around his eyes. Sarah closed the magazine with more force than necessary, her heart racing unexpectedly. She had built her company in part to prove Michael wrong, to show that her mind and ambition remained intact despite motherhood. Seeing evidence of his company's retreat from the very field where she was gaining recognition felt like vindication she hadn't realized she needed. The Triplets' birthday party the next day was a joyful chaos of games, cake, and excited children. Sarah watched as Alexander organized the other children for a mathematical scavenger hunt he had designed himself. Andrew captivated a small audience with his impromptu performance on a toy keyboard, and Abigail ensured that everyone received equal portions of cake and ice cream. That evening, as Sarah helped her exhausted children prepare for bed, Alexander asked the question she had been dreading for years. "Mommy," he said, his blue eyes, so like Michael's, serious behind his small glasses, "why don't we have a daddy like the other kids?" The room fell silent. Andrew stopped arranging his stuffed animals, and Abigail looked up from her book, both clearly interested in the answer. Sarah sat on Alexander's bed, gesturing for the other two to join them. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, determined to be honest without transferring her own pain and bitterness. "Your father chose a different path before you were born," she said carefully, meeting each child's gaze. "Sometimes adults make decisions that hurt other people, not because the other people did anything wrong, but because they're following what they think will make them happy." "Didn't he want us?" Abigail asked, always cutting to the heart of matters. Sarah took a deep breath. "He made his choice before he knew how amazing you would be. That was his mistake, not a reflection of your worth." "Does he know about us now?" Andrew asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah answered truthfully. "We haven't spoken since before you were born." "We don't need him," Alexander declared with the absolute certainty only a 5-year-old could muster. "We have you." Andrew and Abigail nodded in agreement, and Sarah gathered them into a group hug, blinking back tears. "And I have you. We're a team, the 4 of us." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. She opened her laptop and searched for Michael Thornton on LinkedIn, scanning his profile for clues about his current situation. The corporate headshot showed him smiling confidently, but his employment history revealed subtle signs of instability, lateral moves rather than promotions, departments shifting under his leadership. Sarah closed the browser quickly, ashamed of her curiosity, yet strangely comforted by the knowledge that Michael's path wasn't as triumphant as she had feared. Her company was growing steadily, her children were thriving, and for the first time since that devastating day in their Manhattan penthouse, she felt truly confident in her future. That night, observing her children sleeping peacefully, Sarah didn't know that in just 8 years they would be face to face with the father who had rejected them, in a confrontation that would forever change the balance of power between her and Michael. That night, Sarah dreamt of Michael's face when he had told her she was boring and predictable. In the dream, she handed him a copy of Fortune magazine with her face on the cover, watching as shock replaced his smug certainty. She woke with a start, the memory dream so vivid she could almost smell his cologne. Reaching for her phone, she checked the time. 5 o'clock in the morning, the silent hour before her day officially began. 5 years had passed since Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail had entered the world. 5 years of struggle, growth, and incremental victories that were finally culminating in something resembling success. Bennett Renewable Energy now occupied a modest but respectable office in a renovated warehouse in Manhattan. The exposed brick walls and industrial windows gave the space character that their previous Brooklyn location had lacked, and the Manhattan address provided legitimacy when courting potential investors. Sarah straightened her desk, preparing for the board meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock. As founder and CEO, she had assembled a small but effective team to guide the company's growth. Elena Rodriguez remained her most trusted advisor and board member, having increased her investment as the company demonstrated consistent progress. "Morning, boss," Thomas Chen called as he entered, now her chief technology officer despite being barely 30. His brilliance with engineering challenges had proven invaluable as they scaled production. "Conference room is prepped for the meeting," added Layla Washington, who had risen to head of materials research. "The quarterly reports are printed, and the presentation is loaded." Sarah nodded her thanks, surveying her growing team. Now 10 employees strong, each one carefully selected not only for their technical skills, but for their belief in the company's mission. They had remained lean by necessity, but what they lacked in numbers they made up for in dedication. "Let's show them what we've accomplished," Sarah said, straightening her navy blazer, still off the rack, but several steps up from her thrift store finds of previous years. The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with Sarah presenting impressive quarterly results. Their technology had been implemented in 3 municipal projects, and inquiries were coming from both domestic and international entities interested in more efficient energy storage solutions. "Revenue is up 17% over last quarter," Sarah announced, advancing to the next slide. "And our new patent application for the second-generation storage system has been accepted for review." Elena smiled approvingly from her seat at the table. Now, in her late 50s, the investor had become something of a mentor to Sarah, offering business guidance that complemented Sarah's technical expertise. "What about expansion plans?" asked Martin Friedman, their newest board member who represented a clean energy investment fund. "The Brooklyn manufacturing facility is reaching capacity." "We're evaluating options," Sarah replied. "Our priority is maintaining quality control while scaling production. I've included 3 scenarios in the appendix for your review." As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a familiar mix of pride and exhaustion. Building the company while raising triplets required a level of compartmentalization and efficiency that stretched her limits daily. But the alternative, failing to realize her vision, proving Michael right, was unthinkable. Later that afternoon, Sarah left the office early to attend an important milestone, the triplets' first day of primary school. Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail would be entering kindergarten, though their academic assessments suggested they were already working beyond that level in several subjects. At home, Sarah carefully prepared 3 identical lunch boxes, adding a small note to each one. For Alexander, a math puzzle. For Andrew, a music-themed riddle. For Abigail, an inspirational quote about leadership. Small touches to remind them she was thinking of them throughout the day. "Are my superheroes ready for their first day?" Sarah called, adjusting the collars on 3 crisp school uniforms. A private school scholarship had been one of the first luxuries she'd allowed when the company began generating revenue. "I've packed my advanced mathematics workbook," Alexander announced, his glasses slightly too big for his small face, giving him an owlish appearance that matched his serious demeanor. "Mrs. Martinez helped me practice piano this morning," Andrew added quietly. "I can play Twinkle Twinkle with both hands now." Abigail was busy checking her brother's backpacks, ensuring they had everything they needed. "Alexander almost forgot his inhaler again," she reported, her organizational skills already apparent at 5 years old. As they approached the school gates, Sarah felt the familiar ache of dual responsibilities. The company needed her attention. A potential investor was visiting tomorrow. But her children were experiencing a pivotal moment. The balance never seemed to get easier, only different. "Mrs. Bennett?" a voice called as the children joined their classmates in line. Sarah turned to find Ms. Patel, Alexander's teacher, beckoning her over. "I wanted to mention something before you leave," Ms. Patel said, lowering her voice. "I gave Alexander some simple addition worksheets yesterday during orientation, and he completed them in minutes, then asked for multiplication problems instead. He's operating at least at a 3rd grade level mathematically." Sarah nodded, unsurprised but proud. "He's always been fascinated by numbers. We can discuss additional enrichment if necessary." Similar conversations followed with Andrew's and Abigail's teachers. Andrew's extraordinary musical ear had been noticed during the brief piano introduction, while Abigail had already organized her classmates into an efficient line without teacher prompting. "They're quite remarkable children," the school principal commented, having overheard the discussions, "especially given their circumstances." The slight hesitation wasn't lost on Sarah. Their circumstances? Well, being raised by a single mother who also runs a company, it's impressive how well adjusted they are, the principal clarified, though her expression suggested she had been thinking about their lack of a father. Sarah maintained her professional smile, though her spine stiffened. "They're loved and supported. That's all any child needs." Later that evening, after the triplets had enthusiastically recounted their first day and were now engrossed in their respective activities, Alexander with mathematics flashcards, Andrew at his keyboard, and Abigail organizing her school supplies for the next day, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of relaxation with a cup of tea and the latest industry magazine. As she flipped through the pages, an article caught her eye. "Women Transforming the Energy Sector." Curious, she began to read, only to freeze at a photo partway through the feature. There, at some industry gala, stood Michael with Jennifer on his arm. The caption identified her as his wife of 3 years. Sarah's tea grew cold as she read the accompanying text. Amid profiles of female innovators was a sidebar about the broader industry, mentioning that traditional players like Thornton Enterprises are facing challenges adapting to the green energy revolution, with stock prices dropping 15% over the past quarter as investors question their slow pivot from fossil fuel partnerships. Michael looked older than she remembered, fine lines appearing around his eyes, though his posture still radiated the confidence she had once found so attractive. Jennifer remained stunning, though her smile seemed slightly strained in the photograph, her grip on Michael's arm perhaps tighter than necessary. Sarah closed the magazine quickly, unwilling to allow Michael's image to contaminate her peaceful evening. Yet the information lingered. Thornton Enterprises struggling in the very field where Bennett Renewable Energy was thriving. The irony wasn't lost on her. Later that night, as she tucked the triplets into bed, Alexander asked the question she had been dreading since their conversation on their 5th birthday. "Mommy, Tommy at school said everyone has a dad somewhere. Where is our dad?" Sarah sat on the edge of Alexander's bed, gesturing for Andrew and Abigail to join them. This was a conversation they should have together. "Your father's name is Michael Thornton," she began, deciding that at 5 they deserved more concrete information than the vague explanation she had given previously. He runs a company called Thornton Enterprises. Before you were born, he decided he didn't want to be a father. Didn't he love us? Andrew asked, his sensitive nature making the question particularly painful. Sarah chose her words carefully, determined to be honest without transferring her own pain. Your father made his choice before he knew you. He decided that his career and freedom were more important to him than family. Is that why he left? Because he didn't want us? Abigail's directness was both a blessing and a challenge. He left because he made a poor choice, Sarah explained. Sometimes people take the easy path instead of the right one. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong or that you're not worthy of love. Does he know we're awesome now? Alexander asked, his natural confidence unshaken by the revelation. Sarah smiled, despite the heaviness in her chest. I don't think he knows anything about you. We haven't spoken since before you were born. His loss, Abigail declared with finality, her small face set in determination that reminded Sarah startlingly of her own expression when facing business challenges. Completely his loss, Sarah agreed, gathering them into a group hug. Because I have the 3 most extraordinary children in the world. After the triplets were asleep, Sarah sat at her small desk in the corner of her bedroom, the space that served as her home office. Instead of reviewing contracts as planned, she found herself opening her laptop and typing Michael Thornton into the search bar. Results populated immediately. Business articles, press releases, social media mentions. She clicked on his LinkedIn profile, telling herself it was merely professional research on a competitor. The profile showed a career that looked impressive at first glance, CEO of Thornton Enterprises for over 8 years now, but Sarah's trained eye noticed subtle signs of instability. Lateral moves between divisions, projects announced with fanfare that quietly disappeared from the company website months later. References to strategic restructuring that typically signaled financial challenges. Sarah closed the browser, a complex emotion washing over her. Not quite satisfaction at his apparent struggles, but a certain vindication. While Michael had predicted her ambition would dissolve into the mundane tasks of motherhood, she had instead built a growing company in the very field his business was failing to adapt to. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the day her triplets might eventually meet their father. Would he recognize himself in Alexander's analytical mind, in Andrew's artistic sensitivity, in Abigail's natural authority? Would he regret his choice to miss witnessing their growth from helpless newborns to the remarkable individuals they were becoming? That night, observing her children sleeping peacefully, Sarah didn't know that in just 8 years they would be face to face with the father who had rejected them, in a confrontation that would forever change the balance of power between her and Michael. Sarah closed her laptop, the image of Michael's LinkedIn profile fading to black as she tried to push away thoughts of her ex-husband. 8 years had passed since the birth of the triplets, and Bennett Renewable Energy had grown from a desperate dream into a respected player in the clean energy market. Tomorrow would bring another milestone, her first major federal contract presentation, and she couldn't afford to waste mental energy on ghosts from the past. Morning light filtered through the windows of Sarah's Upper West Side apartment, a far cry from the dingy Bronx walk-up where she had once rocked 3 newborns simultaneously. She had purchased this spacious 3-bedroom home when Bennett Renewable Energy secured its first round of significant venture capital funding 2 years earlier. While not ostentatious, it provided each child with their own bedroom and featured large windows that bathed the living spaces in natural light. "Alexander! Andrew! Abigail! Breakfast in 10 minutes, Sarah called, expertly flipping pancakes while reviewing contract points in her mind. At 8 years old, the triplets were increasingly independent, each developing distinct personalities that both delighted and occasionally challenged her. Alexander appeared first, already dressed in his school uniform, his tablet in hand displaying complex mathematical equations. "Mom, I've been working on optimizing your battery charging algorithm. I think there's a way to reduce power consumption during the initialization phase by 7%. Sarah raised an eyebrow, impressed despite her familiarity with her son's extraordinary abilities. Show me after school. And remember, there's more to life than algorithms. Andrew entered next, his fingers tapping an invisible piano on the countertop, eyes distant as he composed music in his head. Mrs. Abramowitz says I might be ready for the young musicians' regional competition next month, he mentioned casually, though the slight tremor in his voice revealed his excitement. That's wonderful. Sarah slid a plate of pancakes toward him. We'll discuss the details tonight. Abigail arrived last, already speaking into a small recording device. Note to self: finalize presentation for school council meeting about plastic reduction in the cafeteria. Prepare counter-arguments for budget concerns. Sarah smiled at her daughter's organizational skills. At 8, Abigail was already showing the leadership qualities that would likely take her far beyond wherever her brother's technical and artistic talents led them. After dropping the children at their private school, a necessary expense that ensured they received education tailored to their exceptional abilities, Sarah headed to her office in the gleaming glass building that now housed Bennett Renewable Energy's headquarters. With over 200 employees across 3 states, the company had expanded dramatically from its humble beginnings. "Morning, Sarah," Thomas greeted her, now serving as Chief Technology Officer. His youthful enthusiasm remained, though responsibility had matured him considerably. "The Department of Defense representatives will be here at 11. Layla has the demonstration units ready in Conference Room A." Sarah nodded, scanning the briefing documents he handed her. "This contract could change everything, Thomas. Military applications would prove our technology can withstand the most demanding conditions. And the $50 million contract wouldn't hurt either," he added with a grin. The hours before the presentation passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Bennett Renewable Energy had developed a solar storage system that could power military field operations with unprecedented efficiency and durability. If approved, their technology would be deployed at bases worldwide, providing both substantial revenue and invaluable credibility. At precisely 11 o'clock, Sarah welcomed 4 stern-faced Defense Department officials into the conference room. As she launched into her presentation, years of practice had transformed her from the nervous speaker who had once pitched at small startup competitions into a commanding presence whose expertise was unquestionable. "Our system maintains 97% efficiency after 500 charge cycles, compared to the industry standard of 70%, Sarah explained, directing their attention to the demonstration unit. "More importantly, it continues functioning in extreme temperatures, high humidity, and dusty conditions, all critical factors for field operations." 3 hours later, after rigorous questioning and technical demonstrations, the lead official extended his hand. "Ms. Bennett, we'd like to move forward with implementation. Your technology represents exactly the kind of innovation the department is looking to support. Expect formal contract documents within the week." After the officials departed, the office erupted in celebration. The $50 million contract wasn't just their largest to date. It represented validation at the highest level of government. "We did it," Elena said, embracing Sarah warmly. Once merely an investor, Elena had become both mentor and friend over the years. "This will open doors we haven't even considered yet." That evening, Sarah left the office early to celebrate with the Triplets. She stopped at their favorite bakery to purchase a special dessert, her mind already racing with plans for the company's expansion. The contract would allow them to open offices internationally, beginning with Europe and eventually Asia. As she entered their apartment building, the doorman handed her an envelope. "This came for you this afternoon, Ms. Bennett. Special delivery." Inside the elevator, Sarah opened the cream-colored envelope bearing an embossed logo she recognized immediately. The Chicago Energy Innovation Conference, the industry's most prestigious annual event. Scanning the letter, her breath caught. "Dear Ms. Bennett, We are pleased to invite you to be our keynote speaker at this year's conference addressing the future of sustainable energy storage. As one of the field's most innovative leaders, Sarah leaned against the elevator wall, momentarily overwhelmed. The Chicago conference was where industry leaders gathered annually to showcase cutting-edge technologies and form crucial partnerships. Being invited as keynote speaker was an honor typically reserved for established corporate giants or renowned academics, not 8-year-old companies founded by single mothers. As the elevator doors opened on her floor, Sarah continued reading, nearly missing the postscript at the bottom of the page. For your planning purposes, attached is a preliminary list of notable attendees and fellow speakers. Flipping to the second page, Sarah froze as a familiar name leapt out. Michael Thornton, CEO, Thornton Enterprises. Panel discussion: Traditional energy companies adapting to the green revolution. The apartment door opened before she could process this information. "Mom, did you hear? I got the highest score in the state mathematics competition," Alexander called, rushing toward her with a certificate in hand. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah managed, quickly folding the letter into her purse. Tonight was for celebration, not dwelling on unexpected complications. The triplets' achievements had multiplied in recent months. Alexander had begun taking advanced mathematics courses online through a prestigious university program. Andrew had mastered pieces typically performed by musicians twice his age, his piano teacher suggesting he might have perfect pitch. Abigail had been elected student council president despite being the youngest candidate, her natural leadership qualities apparent to classmates and teachers alike. After dinner, when the children were engrossed in their respective activities, Sarah retrieved the conference invitation. Michael would be there. After 8 years without contact, they would be in the same space, breathing the same air. The thought sent an unexpected tremor through her hands. Sarah pulled out her laptop, hesitating only briefly before typing Michael Thornton Chicago Energy Conference into the search bar. Results populated immediately, a press release from Thornton Enterprises announcing Michael's participation in the panel discussion. The accompanying photo showed Michael in a tailored suit, standing confidently beside a Thornton Enterprises display. He looked successful, assured, and only slightly older than when she'd last seen him. The article mentioned Thornton's pivot toward sustainable practices and adaptation strategies for traditional energy companies facing market pressure. Sarah closed the browser, emotions swirling. There was something almost poetic about the situation. She had built her company in direct opposition to everything Michael had claimed she couldn't be. Now, they would share a stage at the industry's most prestigious event, with her as the keynote and him as merely a panelist. For 3 weeks, Sarah prepared meticulously for the conference. Her presentation was refined until each slide, each data point, each conclusion was irrefutable. She commissioned a new suit, her first truly high-end purchase, a deep crimson Armani that conveyed both confidence and femininity. This wasn't vanity, it was armor. "Mom, why are you practicing your speech again? You've given hundreds of presentations," Abigail asked one evening, finding Sarah rehearsing in front of her bedroom mirror. "This one's special," Sarah replied, smoothing the jacket of her suit. "It's at a very important conference where the most influential people in my industry will be listening." "Will it help the company grow bigger?" Alexander asked, always focused on practical outcomes. "It might," Sarah nodded, "but more importantly, it's recognition of what we've built." The night before her departure for Chicago, Sarah finalized arrangements for the triplets. Mrs. Martinez would stay in the apartment during the 3 days Sarah would be away, the longest she had ever been separated from her children. "You call every night," Abigail instructed solemnly as Sarah packed, "and bring us something from Chicago." "I promise," Sarah smiled, pushing away the anxiety of leaving them. At 8, they were far more self-sufficient than most children their age, but they remained the center of her universe. The flight to Chicago the next morning gave Sarah time to review her notes once more and steel herself for the possibility of encountering Michael before the formal sessions began. She had rehearsed various scenarios in her mind, a casual acknowledgement if they passed in a hallway, a professional nod if they found themselves in the same discussion group. What she hadn't prepared for was the news that greeted her upon check-in at the conference hotel. "Ms. Bennett, the conference coordinator asked me to give you this update," the receptionist said, handing her a printed schedule revision. "Mr. Thornton has cancelled his appearance due to scheduling conflicts. The panel has been reorganized accordingly." Relief and disappointment battled within her. Part of her had wanted the confrontation, wanted Michael to see firsthand what she had built, how wrong he had been about her potential. The other part was grateful to avoid the emotional complexity his presence would bring. Sarah's keynote address the following morning was delivered to a packed auditorium. Industry leaders, government officials, and media representatives listened intently as she outlined Bennett Renewable Energy's vision for sustainable storage solutions and the transformative impact their technology could have on global energy consumption. "The future isn't about incremental improvements to existing systems," she concluded, standing confidently center stage. "It's about reimagining what's possible when we approach problems with fresh perspective and unwavering commitment." The standing ovation that followed confirmed what Sarah already knew. She had arrived at a level of professional respect that far exceeded what most entrepreneurs achieved in decades, let alone 8 years. As attendees swarmed her afterward, business cards extended and partnership opportunities suggested, she caught fragments of conversation nearby. Thornton's cancellation was last minute. Heard they're having financial troubles, unable to adapt quickly enough to the changing market. That evening in her hotel room, Sarah video-called the Triplets, their excited chatter about their day a welcome distraction from thoughts of Michael. As she described her successful presentation, she realized she was genuinely glad he hadn't been there. Her triumph wasn't about him anymore. It was entirely her own. While accepting the applause of the packed auditorium, Sarah couldn't imagine that in just 5 years, it wouldn't be her seeking Michael, but him begging for a meeting with the woman who now commanded a company valued in billions, a company that could either save or destroy what remained of the Thornton empire. While accepting the applause of the packed auditorium, Sarah couldn't imagine that in just 5 years, it wouldn't be her seeking Michael, but him begging for a meeting with the woman who now commanded a company valued in billions. A company that could either save or destroy what remained of the Thornton empire. The memory of that conference faded as Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 58th floor of Bennett Tower, adjusting the cuffs of her tailored Armani suit. The Manhattan skyline spread before her like a kingdom, the late afternoon sun turning the glass facades of neighboring skyscrapers into sheets of gold. At 41, Sarah Bennett had transformed from a desperate single mother into one of the most powerful women in the global energy sector. She turned from the view to survey her expansive office. Sleek, minimalist furniture, original artwork, and a glass desk that seemed to float above the polished concrete floor created an atmosphere of understated power. The only personal touches were the framed photographs of Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail, no longer babies, but poised, confident 13-year-olds whose exceptional abilities had only grown with time. On her desk, the latest issue of Forbes magazine lay open, her own image on the cover beneath the headline, "The Green Queen: How Sarah Bennett Revolutionized the Energy Market and Built an Empire from Nothing." The 8-page feature detailed her remarkable journey, from the first patent sales while working as a waitress to the historic IPO 3 years ago that had instantly made her a billionaire. Bennett Renewable Energy was now valued at $4.7 billion, with operations in 17 countries and over 4,000 employees worldwide. Thomas entered after a light knock, bearing coffee in a porcelain cup emblazoned with the company's elegant leaf and lightning bolt logo. Now, in his mid-30s, he had grown from the eager young engineer into a seasoned executive who had refused multiple headhunting attempts from tech giants. "The Triplets just arrived from school," he informed her, placing the coffee at the precise spot on her desk where she preferred it. "They're waiting in the conference room as requested." Sarah nodded, checking her watch. a subtle Patek Philippe that had replaced the drugstore timepiece she'd worn during the company's early years. "Any word from the Department of Energy about the contract timeline?" The secretary himself called. "They're expediting approval. Your congressional testimony last month apparently made quite an impression." Sarah allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The past 13 years had been an exercise in strategic patience, each move carefully calculated to build not just a company, but a legacy. The days of struggling to feed 3 infants while piecing together business plans on a second-hand laptop seemed almost like someone else's life now. The conference room door opened to reveal her children, all in the navy and crimson uniforms of Westfield Academy, the prestigious private school they had attended since 3rd grade. At 13, they remained remarkably close despite their increasingly divergent interests and abilities. Alexander approached first, his posture straight, eyes bright behind designer glasses. He placed a gold medal on the conference table. "First place in the National Mathematics Olympiad," he announced with quiet pride. The committee mentioned they've never had a middle school student solve the final problem before. Sarah embraced him warmly. "Congratulations. We'll celebrate properly tonight." Andrew, slightly taller than his brother but with the same striking blue eyes, Michael's eyes, moved forward next. His fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern on the table edge, a habit he had developed as a toddler when composing music in his head. "The benefit recital is confirmed for next month," he said. "Carnegie Hall donated the space once they heard it was for climate refugee relocation programs. They're anticipating record donations." Sarah nodded, remembering the days when Andrew had practiced on a toy keyboard in their tiny Bronx apartment. Now he was regarded as one of the most promising young pianists in the country, his talent matched only by his commitment to humanitarian causes. Abigail, her dark hair swept into a practical ponytail, was reviewing documents from her school tablet. "My entrepreneurship project on female leadership in STEM fields won the national competition," she mentioned, as if discussing the weather rather than a major achievement. "The judges want to implement the mentorship program I designed in 500 schools next year." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest as she gazed at her remarkable children. They had not only survived the devastating circumstances of their birth, but had thrived beyond all expectations. Each possessed extraordinary gifts that they were already using to improve the world around them. "I'm incredibly proud of all of you," Sarah said, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "More than any business success, you 3 are my greatest achievement." Thomas reappeared at the door with an apologetic expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but the final guest list for the Benson Award ceremony arrived. I thought you might want to review it before tomorrow's preparations." Sarah took the tablet he offered, scrolling through the names of industry leaders, government officials, and celebrities who would attend the prestigious event where she would receive the Benson Award for Sustainable Innovation, the highest honor in her field. The triplets continued chatting among themselves, discussing an upcoming school project they were collaborating on. Sarah half listened as she reviewed the attendee list, her practiced eye noting potential investors and partnership opportunities. Her finger froze mid-scroll, heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. Michael Thornton, CEO, Thornton Enterprises. She stared at the name, 13 years of carefully compartmentalized emotions threatening to break through their barriers. Michael would be there, tomorrow night, in the same room as her and the children he had abandoned before birth. "Mom, is everything okay?" Andrew asked, his sensitive nature making him particularly attuned to emotional shifts. Sarah composed her features quickly, years of boardroom negotiations having perfected her poker face. "Nothing important," she assured him. "Just some business details to sort out." The triplets exchanged glances but didn't press further. They had grown up understanding that their mother's company demanded a portion of her attention even during family time, a reality they had accepted with remarkable maturity. After reviewing their schedules for the following week, Alexander's advanced physics program, Andrew's recital preparations, Abigail's student government initiatives, Sarah sent them home with her driver, promising to join them for dinner in 2 hours. Alone in her office once more, Sarah allowed herself to confront the reality of Michael's planned attendance. She hadn't seen him in person since that devastating day in their penthouse when he had tossed a check at her pregnant form and walked away from his unborn children. Why was he coming to the ceremony? The Thornton Enterprises she tracked through industry reports was a shadow of its former self, having lost 40% of its market value in the past year alone. Michael's failure to adapt to the green energy revolution, the very field she had pioneered, had left his company vulnerable to changing market demands and increased regulation. Sarah opened her laptop and typed Michael's name into the search bar, something she hadn't done in years, having long ago stopped needing the motivation of proving him wrong. Recent photos showed a man who had aged more than 13 years should warrant. Lines carved deep around his eyes, a slight paunch straining against expensive suits, hair thinning despite obvious interventions. The confident smirk she remembered had been replaced by a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Recent headlines told the story. Thornton Enterprises announces third round of layoffs. Investors question Thornton's viability in changing energy landscape. Bankruptcy rumors plague once mighty Thornton Enterprises. According to financial analysts, the company was months, perhaps weeks, from declaring bankruptcy. Michael's strategic miscalculations and resistance to renewable technology had left Thornton Enterprises unable to compete in a market that had evolved beyond his understanding. Sarah closed the browser, surprised by her lack of satisfaction at his downfall. The revenge fantasy that had sustained her through countless sleepless nights with 3 infants had long since been replaced by genuine pride in what she had built, not in opposition to Michael, but for herself and her children. That evening, Sarah arrived home to find the triplets already engaged in their usual activities. Alexander was programming a simulation on his computer. Andrew was practicing at the grand piano that dominated one corner of their spacious living room, and Abigail was organizing notes for her next school government meeting. After dinner, Sarah checked final details for the award ceremony with her assistant. The Benson Award was presented annually to the business leader who had made the most significant contribution to sustainable development. Previous recipients included tech billionaires and industrial titans with decades-long careers. At 41, Sarah would be the youngest recipient in the award's history, and the first single mother. Later, as the apartment quieted for the night, Sarah found herself drawn to the children's rooms, a habit formed in those early days when every moment of silence had been precious and precarious. Alexander slept with books scattered across his bed, complex equations filling the whiteboard that covered one wall of his room. Andrew's space was meticulously organized, his walls adorned with framed concert programs and musical notation. Abigail's room reflected her practical nature. A scheduling board outlined her goals for the next 3 months, color-coded and prioritized with military precision. Sarah paused in Abigail's doorway, watching her daughter's peaceful breathing. Would Michael recognize himself in her determined jaw? Would he see his mathematical mind in Alexander's brilliance, or his hidden artistic soul in Andrew's musical genius? Would he feel the magnitude of what he had discarded 13 years ago? The following morning, Sarah prepared with methodical precision for the evening's ceremony. Her stylist arrived at 7, followed by her makeup artist and the designer delivering her custom gown. The red Valentino creation had been selected not just for its elegance but for its symbolism, the color of power, passion, and rebirth. The car will arrive at 6:30, her assistant confirmed. The triplets' formal wear has been delivered and pressed. As Sarah stood before her mirror, the transformation complete, she barely recognized the desperate young woman who had once sobbed on the floor of a Bronx apartment, 3 infants wailing around her. That woman existed now only in memory, replaced by someone who had rebuilt herself through sheer force of will. "Children, are you ready?" Sarah called, emerging from her bedroom. "Our limousine is waiting." The triplets appeared in the hallway, impeccably dressed. Alexander and Andrew in tailored tuxedos that highlighted their athletic builds, both with Michael's striking blue eyes and strong jawline. Abigail wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her mother's red, her dark hair arranged in an elegant updo that made her look older than her 13 years. "Today is special," Sarah said, adjusting Alexander's bow tie with practiced fingers. "More than you can imagine." While the limousine glided through Manhattan traffic toward the Plaza Hotel, Sarah couldn't know that in a few hours, Michael Thornton would be face to face with the living embodiment of his greatest mistake, and that by morning, his remaining world would lie in ruins. The limousine glided through Manhattan's evening traffic, its sleek black exterior reflecting the city lights as Sarah gazed out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of the confrontation to come. Beside her, the triplets chatted excitedly about the ceremony, unaware that tonight would mark their first encounter with the father who had rejected them before birth. The Plaza Hotel came into view, its historic facade illuminated against the darkening sky. Photographers lined the entrance, their cameras poised to capture arrivals for what was considered the most prestigious event in the sustainable energy calendar. The Benson Award ceremony had drawn the elite of American business, politics, and entertainment, all gathered to witness the crowning of this year's honoree. "Remember," Sarah said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her crimson Valentino gown, "there will be a lot of photographers and journalists. Just smile naturally and stay close to me." "We know the drill, Mom," Alexander replied, adjusting his glasses with practiced nonchalance. At 13, he had already accompanied Sarah to enough public events to understand the protocol. As their driver opened the door, the flashbulbs erupted in a storm of light. "Sarah Bennett and family arriving," announced the event coordinator at the entrance, triggering a renewed frenzy of camera clicks and excited murmurs. Sarah emerged with practiced grace, her red gown catching the light dramatically. The triplets followed, poised and confident despite their youth. Together they presented a striking tableau, the successful matriarch and her extraordinary children, all bearing the unmistakable Bennett confidence that Sarah had cultivated in them since infancy. Across the grand ballroom, Michael Thornton froze mid-conversation, his champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips. The sight of Sarah, radiant and powerful in that commanding red dress, would have been shocking enough. But it was the three teenagers accompanying her that drained the color from his face. Even at this distance, the resemblance was unmistakable. The boys were carbon copies of himself at 13, from their posture to the distinctive Thornton blue eyes that had skipped generations in his family before appearing in him. "Michael, are you all right?" Jennifer touched his arm, her voice laced with concern. At 35, Jennifer Thornton still possessed the beauty that had once graced magazine covers, though subtle signs of strain had begun to appear around her eyes. Her marriage of 10 years had yielded social status, but had failed to produce children, a fact that had become increasingly painful as Michael's business difficulties mounted. I need some air," Michael mumbled, his eyes still fixed on the quartet across the room. He moved quickly toward the terrace doors, nearly colliding with a waiter in his haste to escape. Jennifer followed, confusion evident in her expression as she glanced back, trying to identify what had triggered her husband's sudden distress. Her gaze landed on Sarah Bennett, and a flicker of recognition crossed her features. She had seen photographs of Michael's ex-wife in business publications, of course, but had never encountered her in person. Her eyes then shifted to the three teenagers, and understanding dawned slowly, painfully, as she noted their familiar features. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her entrance with practiced poise, acknowledging greetings from fellow executives and government officials with warm smiles and firm handshakes. If she noticed Michael's abrupt departure, her expression betrayed nothing. "Sarah Bennett, congratulations on the Benson Award," called the Secretary of Energy, approaching with an extended hand. "Your testimony last month helped push our renewable infrastructure bill through committee." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary," Sarah replied, seamlessly introducing her children. "These are my triplets, Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail." "Extraordinary young people," the secretary commented after brief exchanges with each teen, "though I shouldn't be surprised given their mother." As the formal start of the ceremony was announced, Sarah guided her children toward their designated table, strategically positioned, whether by coincidence or design, directly adjacent to where Michael and Jennifer would be seated when they returned from the terrace. The ballroom lights dimmed as the master of ceremonies took the stage, a distinguished former senator whose advocacy for clean energy had made him a natural choice to host the Benson Award. "Tonight we celebrate innovators who have transformed our relationship with the planet," he began, his resonant voice filling the ornate space. "Men and women who refused to accept the status quo and instead reimagined how humanity might meet its energy needs without compromising future generations." Sarah felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Without turning, she knew Michael had returned to the ballroom and taken his seat at the neighboring table. She could sense his gaze burning into her profile as she maintained her attention on the stage, her posture relaxed but regal. The triplets, unaware of the drama unfolding, applauded politely as preliminary awards were presented for achievements in various categories of sustainable development. Alexander occasionally whispered observations about the technical specifications mentioned in the presentations, while Andrew's sensitive ear caught the subtle emotional cues in the speakers' voices. Abigail, ever vigilant, was the first to notice the intense stare from the man at the next table. "Mom," she whispered, leaning close, "why is that man looking at us?" "I'll explain later," Sarah murmured, squeezing her daughter's hand reassuringly. Michael remained paralyzed in his seat, unable to tear his eyes away from the three young faces that were hauntingly familiar, his own features reflected back at him through the lens of youth. Jennifer sat rigidly beside him, her smile fixed and brittle as she whispered urgently, "Who are those children with her? They look like you." Michael couldn't form a response, his throat constricting around words that refused to materialize. The enormity of what he was witnessing, the physical embodiment of his greatest abandonment, rendered him speechless. "And now," announced the master of ceremonies, his voice cutting through Michael's spiraling thoughts, "the moment we've all been waiting for. It is my profound honor to present this year's recipient of the Benson Award for Sustainable Innovation, Sarah Bennett, founder and CEO of Bennett Renewable Energy." The ballroom erupted in applause. Sarah rose gracefully, the spotlight following her as she made her way to the stage. Her red gown seemed to absorb the light, transforming her into a figure of almost mythic power as she ascended the steps with measured confidence. At the podium, Sarah adjusted the microphone, her gaze sweeping the room with serene authority before landing briefly but pointedly on Michael's table. 13 years ago, she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I was pregnant, abandoned, and without prospects. A man told me I was insufficient, boring, a burden to his bright future." A hush fell over the audience, the unexpected personal revelation from this normally private business leader capturing everyone's attention. Michael sank lower in his chair, as if physical compression might somehow make him invisible. "That man gifted me with 3 blessings, my children, and an invaluable lesson. No one defines my worth except myself." Sarah's words carried through the silent room, each syllable striking Michael like a physical blow. Today, Bennett Renewable Energy employs 4,200 people across 17 countries. Our technology has reduced carbon emissions equivalent to removing 12 million cars from the roads, and we've just closed a $1.2 billion contract with the federal government. Applause erupted again, genuine admiration rippling through the crowd. Sarah raised her hand slightly, and the room quieted once more. "My children are here tonight," she continued, her expression softening. "Alexander, Andrew, and Abigail, please stand." The triplets rose from their seats, their expressions a mixture of pride and slight embarrassment at the sudden attention. Murmurs swept through the ballroom as guests noticed the striking resemblance between the boys and Michael Thornton, whose reputation in business circles made him easily recognizable. "Michael Thornton is present as well," Sarah continued, looking directly at him for the first time. "The man who signed legal documents swearing these children didn't exist for him. The man who believed my value was tied to my usefulness in his life." The room fell into stunned silence. Jennifer's face drained of color as she stared at her husband in shock. Smartphones rose discreetly throughout the audience, capturing the unfolding drama. "Michael, I didn't plan this," Sarah said, her tone softening slightly. "Fate has an interesting sense of humor. But since we're here, let me formally introduce you. These are your biological children, whom you never wanted to know." Michael rose unsteadily to his feet, his face ashen. "Sarah, please, not here." "Where then, Michael?" Sarah countered, her voice gaining edge. "In your office, which will soon be emptied due to impending bankruptcy? In your home, which banks are preparing to reclaim? Thornton Enterprises is sinking because you failed to adapt. Exactly what you accused me of." Alexander approached the stage, confusion evident in his expression. "Mom, who is this man?" Sarah took a deep breath, the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated for 13 years finally arriving. "Alexander, Andrew, Abigail, this is Michael Thornton, your biological father." The words hung in the air, transforming the elegant award ceremony into a tableau of frozen emotion. Michael stood immobile, caught between his table and the stage, like a man suspended between two realities: the successful life he had constructed on the foundation of abandonment, and the truth that now stood before him in triplicate, wearing his eyes, his jawline, his unmistakable features. The murmuring in the room grew louder as guests processed the revelation. Journalists discreetly tapped notes into their phones, knowing tomorrow's business pages had just been dramatically rewritten. Jennifer remained seated, her rigid posture suggesting a woman calculating her next move with painful clarity. Andrew and Abigail had joined their brother near the stage, the three of them forming an unconscious united front as they regarded the stranger who shared their DNA. Their expressions reflected their distinct personalities: Alexander's analytical assessment, Andrew's emotional sensitivity, and Abigail's protective vigilance. In that moment, beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Ballroom, surrounded by the elite of American society, 13 years of carefully constructed narratives collapsed. Michael Thornton faced the living consequences of his choices, while Sarah Bennett stood above them all, no longer defined by abandonment, but by the empire she had built from its ashes. While photographers captured the unfolding scene with rapid-fire clicks, no one in the grand ballroom realized that the reporter from the Wall Street Journal, positioned near the partially open door, was already typing the headline that would definitively destroy Michael Thornton's reputation by morning. While photographers captured the unfolding scene with rapid-fire clicks, no one in the grand ballroom realized that the reporter from the Wall Street Journal, positioned near the partially open door, was already typing the headline that would definitively destroy Michael Thornton's reputation by morning. A heavy silence descended upon the Plaza Hotel ballroom, the kind that follows an unexpected revelation that shifts the very air in a room. The Benson Award, the elegant decorations, the gathered luminaries, all receded into the background as the human drama took center stage. Sarah stepped away from the podium, her crimson Valentino gown catching the light as she descended the steps with practiced grace. The CEO of Bennett Renewable Energy, who had faced down skeptical venture capitalists and hostile congressional committees, now approached her children with a gentleness reserved only for them. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said softly, placing a protective hand on Alexander's shoulder. "This wasn't how I planned for you to meet." Michael remained frozen between tables, his expensive suit suddenly seeming to hang awkwardly on his frame. The confidence that had once been his trademark, The same arrogance that had allowed him to discard his pregnant wife 13 years ago had evaporated, leaving behind a man who appeared smaller than his physical size. The CEO of the Benson Group stepped forward quickly, sensing the need to redirect the moment. "Let's take a brief intermission before our next segment," he announced smoothly. "Please enjoy the refreshments and networking opportunities." As conversations erupted around the room, Sarah guided the triplets toward a private anteroom that had been reserved for the award recipient. Michael took a halting step in their direction, but was intercepted by Jennifer, her manicured fingers digging into his arm with surprising force. "Don't you dare make a scene," she hissed, her perfect smile never wavering for the benefit of watching eyes. "We'll discuss this at home." "I need to talk to them," Michael replied, his voice hollow. "They're my—" "Don't!" Jennifer cut him off. "Don't you dare say it. Not after 13 years of pretending they didn't exist." Before Michael could respond, a determined figure approached them. Elena Rodriguez, now Bennett Renewable Energy's chairwoman of the board. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice professionally cordial but eyes hard as flint. "Sarah is willing to speak with you privately. Room 312 in 10 minutes. I suggest you come alone." In the quiet anteroom, Sarah sat beside the triplets on a plush sofa, holding their hands as she finally shared the complete truth she had protected them from for years. "Your father and I were married," she explained, her voice steady. "He built his company with my support, and when we found out we were expecting triplets, I thought it was the happiest moment of our lives." She paused, choosing her words carefully. But Michael decided he didn't want the responsibility of children. He felt they would hold back his career and lifestyle. "He abandoned us before we were even born?" Abigail asked, her analytical mind piecing together the implications. Sarah nodded. "He gave me money to leave and signed legal documents renouncing his parental rights." Alexander's face hardened, a mathematical precision to his anger. "So we were just an inconvenience to his profit margin?" "The equation didn't balance in our favor," Sarah replied with gentle honesty. Andrew, always the most emotional of the three, asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Did he ever try to find us, even once?" Sarah shook her head. "No, sweetheart. He chose a different path." A knock at the door interrupted them. Elena entered, her expression somber. "He's waiting in room 312. Are you sure about this, Sarah?" "Yes," Sarah replied, standing and smoothing her gown. "The children deserve closure, and so do I." The walk to room 312 felt like traversing years rather than mere corridors. Sarah entered first, the triplets following close behind, their young faces set with a determination that mirrored their mother's. Michael stood alone by the window, his reflection superimposed over the Manhattan skyline. When he turned, the years of regret etched into his face became fully visible, the lines around his eyes deeper than his age warranted, his posture burdened by more than gravity. "Sarah," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "how could you blindside me like this? To announce it publicly? How could I?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "You gave up any right to dictate terms when you threw $200,000 at me and called our children baggage." Michael flinched, his words from 13 years ago returning to haunt him. His gaze shifted to the triplets who stood slightly behind their mother, studying him with varying degrees of caution and curiosity. "They're remarkable," he whispered, taking a tentative step forward. "You've done an amazing job with them." "Not with them," Sarah corrected firmly. "For them. There's a difference." Alexander stepped forward, his analytical mind unable to resist addressing the situation directly. "Why are you interested in us now? Because we're the children of a billionaire? Or because your own company is failing?" Michael paled at the perceptiveness of the question, his hands twitching slightly at his sides. "It's not like that. I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" Sarah echoed, her voice controlled but edged with 13 years of suppressed anger. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or missing a flight." You made a choice, Michael. A deliberate, calculated choice to abandon your family when they needed you most. Andrew observed Michael with the sensitive perception that made him such an extraordinary musician. You look sad, he noted quietly. Not just because you're in trouble now, but deeper than that. Abigail, protective as always, positioned herself slightly in front of her brothers. Why should we care how he feels? He didn't care about us. Michael sank into a chair, the full weight of his actions visibly crushing him. I'm ruined, he admitted, the words seemingly torn from his throat. Thornton Enterprises will declare bankruptcy next week. Jennifer told me tonight that she's leaving. Everything I built is crumbling. And that should move me? Sarah asked, remembering the cold apartment in the Bronx, the nights of cradling 3 infants alone, the rejection at every job interview. You told me I wasn't worth the check for $200,000 you threw at me. Do you know what Bennett Renewable Energy is worth today? $4.7 billion. I generate that in revenue every quarter. Tears welled in Michael's eyes, a vulnerability he had never shown during their marriage. I want to know my children, please. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then turned to the triplets. This isn't my decision to make. Alexander, Andrew, Abigail, you're old enough to decide if you want this man in your lives. The siblings exchanged glances, their connection allowing for silent communication that had begun in the womb and strengthened through 13 years of shared experiences. Alexander, as usual, spoke for them. Maybe someday, he said with a maturity beyond his years. Not today. Not while your motivations seem so convenient. Back in the main ballroom, rumors circulated rapidly. Jennifer had left the event entirely, her hasty departure noted by the society columnists who thrived on such drama. Michael's phone vibrated continuously in his pocket, calls from board members, lawyers, journalists, all demanding explanations. Sarah completed the evening with remarkable composure, accepting the Benson Award and delivering the remainder of her speech with the same confidence she had shown throughout her career. The triplets remained by her side, their poise unshaken by the evening's revelations. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the notifications on her phone exploding with news alerts. The Wall Street Journal's headline dominated, Bennett Renewable CEO confronts ex-husband who abandoned her pregnant with triplets. Below it, a split-screen image juxtaposed Sarah with her children against Michael leaving the event alone, his expression haunted. By 9 o'clock, reports indicated that Thornton Enterprises stock had plummeted 68% in pre-market trading. By noon, Sarah received word that the company's board had called an emergency meeting to discuss Michael's position. A week later, as Sarah reviewed quarterly projections in her office, her assistant delivered a cream-colored envelope bearing no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on premium stationery. Sarah, I've lost everything. The company that was my identity. The wife I chose instead of you. My reputation. My dignity. But my greatest loss happened 13 years ago, when I rejected you and our children. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my devastating mistake. You proved I was wrong about everything. Michael. Sarah studied the letter, noting the slight tremor in the handwriting, so different from the bold signature that had once confidently marked business deals worth millions. After a moment's consideration, she placed it in a drawer and returned her attention to the monitors displaying her upcoming video conference with world leaders on clean energy initiatives. That evening, Sarah arrived home to find the triplets setting the dining table, their movements synchronized after years of shared routines. The apartment, a spacious triplex with panoramic views of Central Park, hummed with the comfortable energy of a true home. We saw the news about him, Abigail said as they sat down to dinner. He's lost everything. Sarah placed her napkin carefully on her lap. How do you feel about that? Pity, maybe, Andrew replied thoughtfully. But we don't need him. We never did. You are extraordinary, Sarah smiled, looking at each of them in turn. Not because of him or despite him, because of who you've chosen to be. "And you, Mom?" Alexander asked, his penetrating gaze so similar to the one that had once captivated her in a different lifetime. "How do you feel now that he's lost everything?" Sarah considered the question, the weight of 13 years of struggle, triumph, and transformation informing her answer. "I feel that I'm finally free, not because of his fall, but because I no longer need to prove anything. We built our own empire, not based on rejection or revenge, but on innovation and purpose." As the Bennett family continued their dinner peacefully across town, Michael Thornton emptied his executive desk, placing personal items into a cardboard box. Through his window, he could see the imposing Bennett Tower illuminated against the night sky of Manhattan, a monument to the woman he had judged insufficient and the children he would never truly know. In his pocket, today's newspaper headline, "Bennett Renewable signs historic contract to supply technology to 30 countries." Beneath the headline, a photograph of Sarah and the triplets, smiling, united, complete, without any empty space that needed to be filled by him. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen